Namaste. Reality acceptance has been a goal in psychotherapy. However, reality acceptance is not without its own problems. Our subject of discussion today is collapse into reality. And to discuss this subject, which is counter consensus, we have with us psychoanalysis consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So, can we start with this term? What is collapse into reality?
All have our dream worlds. Human mind works in both fantasy and reality. I call it living in the real and the surreal. Right from our childhood till about 18 years of age, we have high dreams about ourselves and about life, and we are extremely optimistic. We are dreamy about life. We are living on cloud 9 to cloud 7, so to say. And slowly, as we get in touch with reality, after we finish our education and we get into the workplace, or somebody gets married and goes into domestic duties, slowly and gradually, that dream world collapses into the world of reality. And this transition from a much larger dream world to a much smaller, confined, rigid, and almost a no option situation, real world, is not only a transition or a simple narrowing down, it actually is a collapse. The transition is so severe that collapse is the real world. Our wide, juicy, and lively dream world collapses into a dry, rigid, limited, and terribly frustrating real world. And this collapse into reality is a very tragic incidence of every human being's life. In psychotherapy, we say that uh, getting ourselves free from fantasy and getting into reality acceptance is one of the central goals of therapy. However, this reality adjustment is an optimum zone between being carried away by fantasy or collapsing into reality. What happens usually is that we don't move from the dream world to the optimum world of reality acceptance, where a healthy proportion of reality and fantasy can coexist. Rather, we actually make a transition from the dream world into a collapse into reality. And this collapse into reality is a very socio-economically driven phenomenon. This is one area where the macro comes into psychoanalysis. Society, economics, culture, all of them determine how severe, bearable or unbearable the collapse is. And this can result in a healthy collapse or a sick collapse. Healthy collapse happens when the collapse is less and you have resources inside your psychic apparatus to manage the collapse, and you have hope that much of the dream world can someday be attained or partly be lived out, at least to the extent that it can satisfy you above the line of unbearable frustration. A sick collapse happens when you realize that you are in the situation of Sisyphus, that it is a torturous life and there is no way out of it. The first difficulty is that life as it is torturous in case of sick collapse, and the worst is that the person sees no way of getting out of it. And that is where extreme rage, pain, and often addiction comes in. It is not out of place that such a person can easily be violent at home or outside, or be prone to severe addictions, because the day full of reality is unbearable. This we see in case of lower economic strata who are doing work which is physically unbearable. It is not actually meant for human beings. We are making human beings do work which normally machines should be doing. And this is where you see that many young people, the moment they get into the work life, within the first 3 years, they develop severe addictions or they become far more violent than they ever were when they were not working. This is exploited both by people who are in the business of addictions as well as political leaders who get a ready army of extremely aggressive and young people who are looking out for a subject to throw their aggression on. And this is manipulated by them. So this collapse into reality is a extremely socio-economico culturally driven phenomenon. And this is not only important from pathological point of view, but even for a normal person and for society at large to design a good culture for quality of life, it is very necessary to understand this collapse into reality. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. In psychoanalysis, how did Freud and Jung deal with it then?
Very differently, because they were very different people. Freud was a worshipper of reality acceptance, whereas Jung was a worshipper of the surreal. Freud's famous statement was, where id is, there ego shall be. Meaning, the fantasy part of the id will be populated by the realistic ego. And reality acceptance for Freud was extremely important, almost one of the central goals of therapy. And lack of reality acceptance was at the heart of neurosis. The drive frustration model has a very strong component of inability to accept reality and let go of pleasures that cannot be had. For Jung, it was a very different thing. Jung was not a worshipper of reality acceptance. Jung was a worshipper of the surreal. His interest used to be in areas of mythology, dreams, literature, history, anthropology, and so on. Freud's philosophical foundations seem to be more in the area of materialism and stoicism, whereas Jung's foundations seem to be more in the area of idealism and an adventure of experiences. Freud, no doubt, went with this overzealous reality acceptance into pessimism and dryness, whereas Jung's life was quite colorful because he never placed much importance on reality acceptance, rather in juicy living in the surreal. In one sense, therefore, to use the language that we have just coined a few minutes back, Freud's collapse into reality was far more severe, if not sick, compared to Jung's collapse into reality, which was far more healthy and juicy. And this comes out in the way both the schools do psychotherapy. In the Freudian school, it comes out as a very clinical, very dry, very bland, very pessimistic kind of reality acceptance oriented school. Whereas Jung's school and therapy comes out to be very juicy, spirit affirming, and more tuned to an adventure of experiences and an adventure of consciousness. Adventure of consciousness is a term I used. It's coined by Satprem, not my term, but does fit in what we are trying to say.
So does culture play a role here? As in, Freud is well accepted in certain culture and Jung is well accepted in certain culture?
Yes, it does play a culture. Culture does play a role because there are more stoic cultures and there are more colorful cultures. So in more stoic cultures, more empirically driven cultures, more materialistic driven cultures, Freud's ideas may find ready acceptance. Whereas in more colorful societies, more juicy societies, Jung's ideas may find uh, a better reception from one point of view. Now, what they
Yeah.
as results in psychotherapy will be a second determinant of
Yes.
how acceptable they are from a clinical standpoint. So there is a non-clinical acceptance and a clinical acceptance. The clinical is based on the results, but a non-clinical, as you said, has a very strong cultural element to it.
Okay. And how do people deal with this collapse into reality?
People deal with it by and large in a very non-optimum way. There are different groups. One group deals with it by having a healthy mix of the real and the surreal, and occasionally in festivals, in social occasions, they live the surreal. Art is used to live the surreal, to bring juice into the and color into life, and they have a hope in the back of their minds that somehow my dream world will be realized. This is a secret hope, not a rational hope. Irrational hope, but a strong hope and a secret hope. And they have a parallel dream world which is parallel to the real world. And they live partly in both, and they carry on in what we would call a healthy life. Unintegrated, but still a healthy life. There are others who are not able to do so. In their case, uh, they respond in various pathological ways. Many of them go into depression. Many of them develop severe rage, and because of that, anxiety. Many of them go into addictions. Many of them go into this situation of uh, collapse, and the collapse followed by pain, deep disappointment with life, hopelessness, and then a resignation with life. And when the resignation comes after a very deep disappointment and hopelessness, then life only becomes like a drudgery. So just as you have a biological suicide, there is also something called psychological suicide. And that person actually has committed a psychological suicide. That he is alive and he does the routine and performs his duties, but in an inward sense, he is not alive anymore. He has no big hopes of his own. He has given up on all his dreams, and he is just living because he's afraid to die. And he is living because he has duties to fulfill. And then life becomes like the curse of Sisyphus, the suffering of Sisyphus. And this is the fate of many people: long-term dysthymia, long-term depression, long-term hopelessness, long-term drudgery of life. People say man dies with his dreams. And that is what happens if the collapse into reality is so severe and pathological, that there is virtually a psychological death. The person gives up his creativity, his productivity, his initiative. And I can give two examples here, one general and one specific. Look at the way people are when they go to work for the first 3 years, and look at the way what they become after 3 to 5 years. And I am not talking about people from top-notch institutions. I'm talking about average. So what happens is that they are very enthusiastic, very dreamy, very optimistic about life in the first 3 years, very soon the system beats them down. And the collapse into reality becomes unbearable. And then they lose all initiative, all motivation, all creativity. They stop producing ideas at all. And they just get into a routine, into a dull and drab life. And if you look at their happiness levels, enthusiasm levels, optimism levels of 3 years back and now, there is a world of difference. There is a pathological reduction in the positive qualities. And this is, in general, a large section of population. Not hundreds and thousands, but millions and crores of people who fall into this. And then there is a silent, lifelong dysthymia, occasionally lifted in festivals, social occasions, or when some attainment happens. And this collapse of reality is very important. When they were dreaming as young people in the college, they were thinking of becoming Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or king or emperors. And now they are struggling to buy a motorcycle or struggling to just become an assistant manager. The goals have just collapsed from becoming an emperor to becoming an assistant manager. Their world of desires has become very small. There is a huge collapse of the mental universe, and this is difficult for most people. So this is the fate of millions and millions of people. I can think of one real life example here, and that has been with me for years. There used to be a boy we used to play cricket with, very talented cricketer. His father was in the police, very ordinary police position, constable or something. This boy also got into the same thing. He must have been around 1920 or something. Got in there. And then he saw the hierarchy above him, the running around, the whole working 12 to 14 hours, carrying out orders. And this was a person who was not used to taking orders from anybody. And this frustrated him so much. And even more, what frustrated him was that there was no way out. Not only this was torturous, but for the next 40 years till he retires, this is going to be like this. There is no way out. And this combined created such rage, such unbearable pain, that the person developed a severe addiction of alcohol. Within less than 1 year of his joining the job, he developed a severe addiction of alcohol. And it was completely environmentally induced. Had he been at a softer place or a place which was rewarding or from where there was possibility to climb up or to get out into an alternative, he would not have developed this self-destructive habit. And for years he had it. I have lost context, so I don't know what was his fate. But this is a specific example I know, and I think this is a representative example of hundreds and thousands of people who are not able to manage this collapse of reality. And this collapse of reality in turn becomes the cause for psychopathology and suffering, not to mention a huge reduction in the quality of life.
So this, the collapse of reality, we can say, is related to surreal.
Yes.
And if how, yeah.
So, when we say the collapse of reality, essentially we are collapsing from the surreal world into the real world, a much wider surreal world into a much narrow and frustrating real world. The real world of constraints, frustration, struggle, dangers, and our own limited capabilities, our own powerlessness and helplessness. In the surreal, we are able to really have our enjoyments. What Lacan calls jouissance. In one sense, if you look at pleasure as sweet pleasure and bitter pleasure, The sweet pleasure really is in the surreal. The bitter pleasure, if one is masochistic enough, is in the real. But for most people, that is not so. So we survive in the real and we really live in the surreal. And therefore, it is very necessary to maintain our surreal by indulging in art, by indulging in dreams, by keeping in touch with our fantasy desires and satisfying them to the extent possible, to keep ourselves always hopeful and lively. Because it is almost like water in sand, that all the enthusiasm, all the freshness, all the youthfulness is like the water. It just is goes into the sand of the real and just erases all the positive parts that we have. And therefore, the collapse into reality is from the surreal, right? And it is equally difficult uh, if reality acceptance moves to the extreme. Then you get into a situation of Sisyphus. You are condemned to reality, and being condemned to reality is as dangerous as being psychotically being in fantasy, the other extreme. And when we say collapsed into reality, it is like being condemned to reality. It's a situation of Sisyphus. So we have different Sisyphus in society, and each of them responds differently with psychopathology when they suffer from the curse of Sisyphus, the collapse into reality.
Can knowledge about oneself and or other activism help us salvage from this collapse, or at least helps you deal with it in a better way?
Yes, they do help us because those who have successfully managed this collapse into reality have a good present, and therefore they live in the present. Those who have half managed this collapse, they may not have a good present, but they are hopeful about a good future. But the third group, which neither has a good present nor good future, hope of the good future, they can only live in the past. Because human beings can live only in the past, present, or future. There is nowhere else to go. So if the present is not good, you live in the future. If present and future both don't seem hopeful, you start revisiting the past. And this is where a revisit to the past and our knowledge about ourselves, which is generated by revisits and by inner journey, they help us to be free from the overwhelming force of collapse into reality. It produces not only distance and freedom from these overwhelming forces, it also provides us with a kick of greatness as though we are moving on the path of enlightenment. And if nothing can be done in the outer world, maybe we are able to do something in the inner world. I'm not dismissing the spiritual process, but I'm saying from a most negative perspective also, the spiritual process has a positive outcome, that it helps us to deal with the collapse of reality at the minimum. Of course, spiritual attainments are goals into themselves. It does enhance quality of life, all of that apart. Enlightenment may be a legitimate goal for many people, and that is perfectly okay. But even from the most negative materialistic standpoint, in the least, thus engagement with the inner process uh, helps you to distance from the overwhelming forces generated by the difficult reality. Uh, get interested inside because it develops an interest. And you never feel bored and frustrated because you feel interested inside. And inside is a world which is relatively free of constraints of outside. And that helps you to overcome the collapse into reality, which essentially is an outside phenomenon, predominantly an outside phenomenon. That is one part. Second part, doing some social activity also helps you, not only because it gives you superego pleasure, it also gives you a meaning in life. And meaning in life is a great helper in dealing with the collapse of reality. In both these parts of social work and yes, social work also gives you a lot of company, and automatically many times in those circuits, good, reliable, stable objects get internalized. The superego strength is developed. The joy of doing something good, the joy of altruism comes out. And they provide us with relief from the collapse of reality. It's a very constructive way out. Inner journey and social work, both are very constructive ways out to deal with the collapse of reality. And both of them have inbuilt element of pleasure, of greatness built into both of them.
So, sir, is midlife or end life crisis related to the collapse?
Yes, this collapse is a gradual process. Actually, it's a continuous process. Right after puberty, it starts. The more we go into the outside world, less we are able to be in our dreams, and more the dreams collapse, and more we start collapsing into reality. But at certain junctions in our life, the collapse becomes very intense. And when we get into the job, first 3 years, thereafter midlife, and thereafter post-retirement towards the end life, this becomes very, very intense. And the reason essentially is because of frustrations, non-achievements, and regrets. That you started off with such dreams and you have achieved so little, and the frustration is so much that you come to a situation where I say, I dare not dream, I dare not dream those dreams again. That kind of situation arises where, particularly in midlife, that you have to swallow the fact that a substantial amount of your desires can never be met, and you just have to do reality acceptance and mourning. And that can cleanse the system, but it does not give you the same optimism and energy what you had before, secretly dreaming that you could achieve your dreams. So yes, you can avoid pathological lows, but you cannot get back to those highs of the youth. And one always longs for that freshness, that elixir, that energy, and that optimism and the dreams of the youth. So midlife and end life both are very important. End life has a different flavor. Midlife has a flavor that what could be done has been done, and now certain things I can do more, certain things have to be accepted and just passed over. In end life, it is in midlife, it is more about reality acceptance and less about regrets. In end life, it is more about regrets and more about the fear of having pursued wrong goals often and having done wrong to other people. So there is a very strong element of guilt and regret. And the fact that there is nothing that can be done to prevent the collapse of the body and eventual death. So that creates a different kind of helplessness in front of the reality. And this collapse into reality, because it becomes almost impossible to hope against reality. In the end part of the life, the collapse is almost total. So mid life and end life both have different flavors, but very intense events of collapse into very difficult reality.
Sir, are there any social tried and tested experiments which saves you from collapsing?
People have tried how to undo this collapse and how to keep the youthfulness alive and how to be young throughout, how to be juicy and optimistic throughout, and not go into that disappointment, resignation, hopelessness, and drudgery of life. And people have tried various models. Osho Rajneesh tried one model of how to lead a very celebration oriented and juicy life and not get into this life of boredom, hopelessness, aimlessness, frustration, unsatisfied desires, and incompatible people around. And he created a model which was based upon freedom, free love, free sex, and so on. He combined materialism with spirituality. He used to call Buddha the Zorba. So there is one model in the Osho commune how to not get into this trap of collapse into reality, how to save oneself. Sri Aurobindo created a different model. It was a model which is more based upon intense spiritual search and a more Vedic culture oriented celibacy and surrender to God, and less focusing on human relationships. So he created a separate model, and that is still there at Auroville, just as the Osho commune is still there in various communes across the world. In India at Pune and many other parts. Similarly, those who could not bear this collapse, some of them just pathologically took to depression, addiction, and so on. Some of them tried to get out of it, and they created the hippie movement, who did not want to get into the drudgery of the industrial world or the agricultural world and wanted to live life differently. And they created the hippie movement, but that got deeply into drugs and into abdication of responsibility and lack of ethics. And then we had a few more experiments in small groups done by people across the world. But these were the major ones. I'm sure if anyone comes up with new experiments, there will be people who will like to try it, because every day is not easy to bear.
Sir, and how about our Indian spirituality? Do we have a framework to
Uh,
explain this collapse of, yeah?
yes, um, Indian spirituality has three frameworks. One is the view of reality. It says that uh, the human integer and the universe is created out of 5 zones: the zone of pure consciousness, the zone of thought, the zone of emotions, the zone of energy, and the zone of matter and force. And a human integer takes something from all these zones to create himself. So there is a view of reality, and there is a view of the human integer who is created by taking small amounts of material from all these zones. Now, in the zones of thought, of zones of emotion and energy, we are told those are the worlds of what we would say the dream world. So the idea there is that those are the spheres of celebration. And there, celestial celebration always is on. These are the extremely colorful, juicy, musical worlds without any suffering or limitations that we have on earth. And because our soul has been there, we have a memory and we always want to go back to those places or recreate those kind of things down here. But the situation here is such that it is like sand in water, that we want that kind of rapture in our uh, nerves, in our bones, but it is not easy to develop that kind of rapture, that kind of pleasure, that kind of colorfulness, joy, and celebration. That is one. Second part is that second explanation given in Indian spirituality is based upon the karmic thing, karmic theory. That on earth, we are for a crash course. And that is the reason why it has been so created, this place, this planet, that you cannot have it as pleasant and as without suffering as some of the astral worlds are. And the karmic load is undone in this place, which means that the collapse into reality and all the suffering is justified, or rather not justified, but is meaningful, because we are unloading our karma. And once we are done with unloading, we will go back to that places of celebration. So there is this karmic element is brought into picture. And then Indian spirituality talks about how to get over this suffering, this collapse into reality, by astral visits, by detaching your astral body and going into those spaces where the celebration is off. Another element is of looking at all our experiences as you can divide all our experiences into 10 or 12 categories, from extremely distasteful and torturous to the ecstatic and the sublime, and all in between. And sorry, the extremely high spheres are where we should be located as much as we can. So the idea there is that all our life we are travelers of these 10 or 12 worlds. It's a very classic Buddhist view. Many schools in Buddhism have this view, that you have 10 or 12 worlds. In Sri Aurobindo Savitri also you have this element of a very profound part of it, the book of Traveler of the Worlds, in which one by one the yogi travels the different spheres of experience. And obviously each sphere is related to some chakra. So ultimately, as all the chakras have to be dealt with, related to each chakra, there is some sphere or the other, or maybe more sphere than the chakras by combination. So these are some, and this traveling through various worlds is an essential part of the Indian spiritual process. So Indian spirituality gets into these things of dealing with collapse into reality through the structure of reality, structure of the human integer, the karmic theory, the astral travel, and travel through the inner worlds, the spheres of experiences, so to say. That's the way it is dealt with. And apart from it, there are ways of how to overcome it as far as possible.
Okay. And in Osho, sir, how does that work?
In Osho, he does not get into, Osho is an atheist. So he is not a believer in God. He also does not get much into metaphysical speculation of the nature of reality. But like on Buddhist lines, he does believe in the journey of the soul and enlightenment. So what he does is that put aside the question of God put aside the question of nature of reality, put aside the question of the structure of the human integer. Focus on two things, that we all want to celebrate life and we all want to get enlightened. And with these two bases, we all want to enjoy life like Zorba and we all want to be enlightened like Buddha. So Buddha, the Zorba, materialism and spirituality, they come together. So celebration combined with meditation, self-growth, psycho-spiritual exercises, and various meditations created by him, ultimately to get into a state of no thought and freedom from desires and fears into a state of awareness and bliss. So he says that you proceed towards enlightenment, celebrating and enjoying all the desires you want to fulfill. And this process of enjoyment will not in any way hamper your quest of enlightenment. In fact, it will help you to overcome your repressions and make it easier to proceed on the spiritual path. That is how it operates in Osho. In fact, it's very interesting to see one more element, how it is dealt with in psychotherapy, psychoanalytic psychotherapy. In psychoanalytic psychotherapy, this collapse in reality is dealt with in 3 or 4 different ways. One is revisit and understanding of those dreams and frustrations. Second, mourning. Mourning of all that cannot be had and has to be let go. And third is reality acceptance. Fourth is finding purpose in life. Now, some schools of psychoanalysis like Jungian school are very much for it, because for them individuation and purpose of life is central. Some schools outside of psychoanalysis like logotherapy also are very insistent on purpose. But in many schools in psychoanalysis, purpose is not taken up with great emphasis. Rather, they only restrict themselves to revisit, analysis, reality acceptance, and catharsis. But if we realize that this whole idea of finding the right purpose is equally important, because without that, you don't really get the man with enthusiasm and good quality of life back again. The productivity, creativity, and the zest for life don't come back like that. So I think when we are dealing with midlife crisis, collapse into reality, or chronic depression, or chronic somatization, or chronic hopelessness of any kind, there is no way out but to go for purpose in addition to the classical things of analysis, reality acceptance, and catharsis. One of the difficulties is we have not generated enough tools to really do it. We are still doing it the old-fashioned generic way. And collapse of into reality, instead of looking at it as a universal tragedy, we have looked upon it in a different way, as though it is imperative on man to generate the capability of reality acceptance, and not look at the difficulty of the environment that the environment is creating. That does not mean that anything will be different if we look at it that way. Environment is not going to respond to you, but the fact that if we look at collapse into reality as almost a universal tragedy, and if we start working upon it, the real dream world opens up, the real articulation of desire opens up, the real self-expression opens up. And I think without that, you are really not doing comprehensive psychoanalysis. Therefore, this exploration of collapse into reality is very necessary to be undone by free association and self-expression. Before one gets into reality acceptance, finding a purpose and creating a program for life, and thereby enhancing the quality of life. And this is very important for many depressive cases also. And especially those that have been long-term dysthymic and have got into depression after a long time dysthymia. And also, especially in dealing with the deprived part of the society, where this is all the more important. One can see the deprived part of the society investing at times even more in the surreal in terms of movies than those who have a fair proportion of their desires met in reality.
Well, sir, it was a pleasure talking to you as always and to discuss this topic in this much details. And our viewers, you can write to us at hvindia@gmail.com and your feedback is always welcome. Thank you, sir. Namaste.
Namaste.